You sure you want to hear this?
What's the guy's name?
Arondir.
I'm never going to get it. It's too hard of a word for me. Nobody goes off trail.
And nobody walks alone.
I think it's the most powerful moment in 20th century literature.
She was so happy to ride a horse.
Yeah.
Has it been 1,000 years since she's ridden a horse or something?
There's a big difference between a book and a movie.
Release the Wog.
When you come to interpretations like the Jackson films or this Amazon series, that's not Tolkien.
Bees. We all loved him. He sure was an idiot.
Nobody else in The Lord of the Rings ever, as I can recall, takes a bath.
Can we keep him?
That was a weird noise that I just made.
Thank you for joining us for the second episode of Across the Sundering Seas. We hope to be a podcast for all Tolkien fans, both gatekeepers and casual fans.
On this episode, we'll talk about The Rings of Power, Episode 3, where we get to visit Numenor, meet new characters that are vital to the history of Middle-earth, learn more about who Halbrand and the Stranger are, and the thing we're most excited about, we will interview one of the world's leading Tolkien scholars, Dr. Verlyn Flieger.
So join us as we adventure across the Sundering Seas. Our first episode we released on YouTube and all the other podcasting sites. We're working on getting on Apple Podcasts still. But we have 244 views right now on that first episode. And I was blown out of the water by how many people watched.
I'm shocked.
I picked my kids up from school and they asked me, how many views did the podcast have? And I was like, 28. And I was proud of that.
Yeah,
I was happy.
That's great.
28 people listened to a 53-minute podcast that we put out. And my daughter was like, 28's not very good. And I was like, well, perspective. But 244, and we have comments. And I knew it. The argument, there was the one comment from your student, and I just knew that there was going to be an argument over women, dwarves, and beards.
Do they have beards? Do they not?
I knew there was going to be an argument, and of course there was. Dr. Gabriel had a spirited conversation with a viewer who, expressed their distaste for something we said about women, dwarves, and beards. I welcome more people to comment, share, repost it. I mean, one of my wife's patients' families sent her a message asking a question, and they're like, can you ask your husband what he thinks about this? And so you just never know who's a fan out there, but I encourage people to dive into it, even if you're a little skeptical of the series. Dive into it because it'll lead you into this fascinating world that Tolkien created.
Where you'll never, it's so vast that you'll never know all the ins and outs.
One of the reasons we're doing this podcast is so that we can learn more ourselves. I have books upon books upon books upon books of Tolkien work, and I collect and collect and collect, and I don't always read them all because, like, this one is an encyclopedia, right? This one is an atlas. I don't just sit down and read them, but with the show taking place in a time where we don't really understand, I'm finding myself poring over these books and learning more about the worlds of Tolkien. And that's part of the reason that I am enjoying this podcast.
And I don't have the depth. Like, I own The Lord of the Rings. I own The Hobbit. I have the Silmarillion on audiobook. And so just within 1 week of doing this podcast, I probably doubled my Tolkien knowledge, and learning from scholars, learning from your insights, just getting to be in Middle Earth even more than I would have normally been has been awesome.
Obviously, I have a lot of Tolkien books. I mean, I named one of my children after Samwise Gamgee's daughter. Tolkien is a big part of my life, but I don't always get to talk about it with people because it's not relevant all the time. And it's relevant again. And I have my mom and my sister and my wife and my children and my friends. They're all watching it. And they're all asking questions, trying to figure things out. And I don't always know the answer, and neither do all of these books because of, the nature of this TV show. But my brother-in-law, for example, he's reading the Silmarillion for the first time, and he's excited about it. He sent me notes today from the Silmarillion, first couple of pages, and it's interesting, and it has me going back in and reading and learning things as well. And so I am loving being able to be a dork out in the open again with people as they try to figure out this TV show, The Rings of Power.
It's amazing to have a new entry point for people that didn't enter into the world when the Lord of the Rings movies were first coming out, and to get to like drag some people in that maybe wouldn't, like friends, girlfriend. Some of my students have been introduced to our podcast and have asked me about it, and so to for them to have an entry point into Middle Earth, I'm really enjoying getting a new place.
One of your students made a comment on our YouTube post. Came here for Mr. Huddy, stayed for the insights.
Yeah, Gerald has he's even been advertising in my classes. He wrote our link up on the board, and he's telling everybody, hey, watch Mr. Huddy's podcast.
And then there are those who aren't going to like the show. Our guest today, Dr. Verlyn Flieger, while she is brilliant in all things Tolkien, she does not like the show and doesn't intend to watch it from what she has told me. But there's still a lot to learn from her.
She has a great perspective and gets to bring a ton of knowledge to us.
Talking with Gabriel and Sarah, our guests from last week, they were impressed that she was going to be talking with us. And so the reality of who she is kind of set in with me. And in fact, I asked Gabriel to join us again on this episode. And this is what he told me. He said, Verlyn is such an important scholar. I think she should get solo billing. And she's generally a very positive person. So even if she is negative to the series, I'm sure she will phrase her opposition in a beautiful way and say other beautiful things about Tolkien.
My name is Verlyn Flieger. I'm, I guess, on this because I'm a Tolkien scholar. I taught Tolkien for many, many years, both at Catholic University in downtown DC and then at the University of Maryland. I've published on Tolkien several books, and I'm one of the co-editors of a yearly journal called Tolkien Studies that accepts interesting articles that people want to send in and have published. So in a nutshell, that's who I am.
What got you connected to Tolkien? What put you in this world?
I read The Lord of the Rings in 1957, 56 or 57, that winter. And I did something that you can't do anymore, which is I read a book that nobody had ever heard of and about which I had no expectations. And it was an absolute revelation. I read it from one volume right through to the end of the last volume, and then I turned right around and started at the beginning again because I didn't want to let go of it. I just loved it. I'd never read anything quite like it. I'd read a lot of things that were sort of like it, like King Arthur and the Norse sagas and epics and Beowulf and the Eddas. And they had elements that I could see in the Lord of the Rings, but the way that Tolkien brought all of that together and created this utterly believable world that you could just go into and inhabit was something I'd never really encountered before. And when it was over, I was so let down that I tried to think of ways that I could keep on being in it. And one of them was to teach it. I wanted to hang out with those guys. And so I asked my university if they would be interested in a course on fantasy, which was my clever way of sneaking Tolkien in. And this was the 70s. And they said they'd love it. So I introduced fantasy and snuck Tolkien right into the middle of it, and it took off. And students registered, and they had to add extra sections. And I've been teaching it in one way or another ever since.
Did I read right that you've edited some Tolkien work itself?
Well, I worked on The Fall of Arthur for a while, but then I edited the story of Kullervo, which is Tolkien's take on Finnish mythology. And I edited the lay of Autru and Itrun, which was his version of Breton, Breton mythology. So I've had a good deal of experience working with Tolkien's manuscripts. And then I co-edited with my colleague Doug Anderson Tolkien's essay on fairy stories.
Forgive my ignorance, but did you actually work with Tolkien on anything? Have you met him?
No, I never met him. I met Christopher.
What was your experience meeting Christopher?
Oh, it was exciting. I met him first at a conference, and then I was invited to spend time with him at his house in France. And I visited him on several occasions. And we've been, I would say, pretty good friends.
New Line, Peter Jackson, they make these movies 20 years ago. Can you tell me about what you thought then and your thoughts on the movies now?
You sure you want to hear this?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I thought they were boring, shallow, big, noisy action movies. I thought they lost all of the philosophy, all of the psychology, all of the very complex attitude that Tolkien has about good and evil, and just sort of flattened it out. I still think that. I was bored.
So for me, I wasn't a big reader. I was also like 14 years old when the first movie came out. For me, it made me dive into the world and from a very, like you said, from a very shallow place. And it wasn't until I got older, I grew up, and even still now, that I'm falling in love with everything else that was invented and written around it. I'm using the new show for myself to be able to live in a world where I wish I could live 24/7, even if it's not perfect. But I'm now finding myself, because I'm doing this podcast, I'm finding myself actually studying for the sake of studying. And if you knew me, I'm not an intellectual. But I've collected these books now, right? Sitting right here, I have an atlas. I've got David Day's encyclopedia. I've got the Silmarillion sitting right here. And I'm digging through them, studying, to see if I can find out more and find out where we're going and learning about the Second Age while we think they're going to reinvent everything. And it's not going to be what I guess you could call canon, the TV show. It's about kind of letting my dorkdom or my nerdism like fly because it's relevant again. And I have people in my life, people are tired of hearing me talk about Tolkien in my life because I talk about him all the time and it's not relevant all the time to them. And so
that's why I got into teaching, because I had to get paid for talking about Tolkien. You might consider that.
The new TV show has come out, and it's largely fan fiction. What are your thoughts on the medium of a TV show and everything that's going on with that?
How much time do I have?
as much as you want.
I think the medium makes its own demands. There's a big difference between a book and a movie, which is what the Amazon series essentially is. And they have a different framework. They have different needs, different demands, different rules. For example, a movie, you're going to laugh, has to move. Whereas a book, with the words on the page, has unlimited time to build up the effects that the author wants and can work in partnership with the reader. I mean, reading books is a two-way street. And it depends on that tremendous symbiosis between the author and the reader and the interface, which is the words, so that it's a dynamic process. When you're watching a movie, you're watching the movie. It's kind of interesting. Move is the operative word. I mean, IE is a prefix, actually, like selfie or foodie. It's a move-e. And so the essence of it is action, things on the move, whereas a book can take all the time in the world to be contemplative about what it wants to say. The other thing is that an image is a very powerful thing. It's there in front of you. It's hard for you to escape. It's a statement. Words are ambiguous. Words can mean different things to different people. Dictionaries can have whole lists of definitions for the same word, and they can overlap so that the word on the page has a greater power, I think, than does the image on the screen. When you come to interpretations like the Jackson films or this Amazon series, that's not Tolkien. And it gives you a little more freedom to assert your own autonomy. And as I think you just said, this is really fan fiction.
Agreed. Yep. I definitely agree. Even can get upset about things here or there. Like I started making a timeline of Sauron's movements in the Second Age, trying to figure out where we are in the Second Age. And it seems like we're messing with the timeline, but I suspect we're going to have to get there.
Like the point Dr. Gabriel brought up about when you translate things to new mediums, things have to be shifted, things have to be condensed or just changed in order for things to make sense in a new medium. And so this may be one of those things.
The episode opens with Arondir being pulled into a camp. And we quickly find out that these are actually orcs. The fact that like they can't get in the sun and you can like literally hear their skin baking in it.
And the Uruk-hai, that's like an intentional thing. Like that's like why Saruman
Bred them.
bred them. Was so that they weren't kind of susceptible to that.
So Arondir arrives in this camp, and he's met with his buddy from his post, and we realize that the elves have been captured as well.
Arondir's he got some hate, I think, the first 2 episodes, but that his storyline is one of the most intriguing ones to me.
Yeah, I'm starting to like it as well.
Yeah, even honestly, even from the beginning, like his character just has a lot of intrigue to me. The kind of like stoic. You don't really see a lot emotionally from him. Those characters always like pique my ears a little bit.
We pan down this tree, and they want the elves to cut this tree down. They are willing to pick a fight
Over a tree. It shows a lot of depth for the elves and their love for nature. And you think about Lothlorien later, and their just love for trees in general. Tolkien's love for trees.
Somebody was complaining that a lot of this doesn't seem like Tolkien, right? Someone was critiquing the series. It doesn't quite seem like Tolkien. And then somebody pointed out that they spent an entire scene talking about a tree,
One tree.
which is very Tolkien-like.
Very.
So
Yeah.
they come up with a plan as well that somebody needs to get out of the trench and look above. So the elf captain picks the fight over the tree, and then like one of the orc leaders comes out and he says, "Oh, you stood up to us. You earned your crew a water break." And they all think it's poison. They don't want to drink it, but they go ahead and drink it. And I watched it. When I watched it the first time, I was shocked. 2 of them take sips of the water, and then the third one just gets himself a big swig, and they slice his throat, and he dies. And I felt horrible for him.
Yeah, he's not even a character that they've built up. You don't know much about him, but the way the actor plays the scene, and 2, just the suspense around it made it a pretty heartbreaking death.
You know, more things that kind of reminded me of Tolkien was, you know, there's all these parallels between World War One and Tolkien and how he wrote that, and they're in a trench right now digging it. I bet water was hard to come by, so that while they don't trust the orc, they need the water as well. The sound editing here was amazing too, with him yelling, finishing the sip of water. You see the tiny slit, and then he collapses.
This is a guy he served with for, what do you say, 79?
79 years.
Yeah, this is hard for Arondir.
Yep.
Even a stoic guy like himself, that's hard for him to see.
So then Arondir says he'll cut the tree. And I think part of the reason he does this, I mean, you see him pause when he gets to the top of the hill, is he knew somebody has to see out what it looks like. So he climbs the tree, and when he gets to the top, he looks around, and they have decimated this land.
Yeah.
Which makes sense. I mean, Mordor is a desert, a barren wasteland. This looks a lot better. You can still see forest in the distance.
There's still something.
There. And then he touches the tree. He speaks to it in Elvish. He was trying to be as reverent as he could be to this tree.
This fight scene is awesome.
It came out of nowhere,
Yeah,
right? I mean,
like-
he just runs, and they use the chains
And
to
it's immediately
fight.
as the scene starts.
Yeah.
The choreography is so cool.
And you can hear they did it right. They did it on purpose in the hottest part of the day,
Yep.
so that they can make the orcs run back. One of them breaks their chains,
Yep.
makes a run for it,
Hopeful.
and takes an axe in the back and dies. And you realize it's not going to be as easy as they thought it was going to be. I love the part where when they release the warg.
Oh, yeah.
Is that how you say that?
Warg, maybe?
They release the wog. My kids screamed through this part.
Yeah, I could see this being...
I actually fast forwarded through the part where the throat got slit for my children, but I let them watch this part, and they were screaming, but did not want me to turn it off.
Wow.
You know, because they realize it's fake. Watching him jump over the warg and, you know, bypass it, and you can tell they're both moving really fast because of how the warg flies into the roots of the tree. And then he grabs the stick and stabs the guy in the neck with the stick.
That's another thing that just makes me love Arondir's storyline, is how hardcore he is.
Yeah, because he's so gentle at the beginning.
Yeah.
His buddy runs up, and the warg is going to get him, and Arondir kills him. He says goodbye to his friend, because he's going to make it to freedom. He peers out, and his friend's just standing there with an arrow. This reminded me of Boromir a little bit.
Yeah, and he gets the second one.
Yeah.
And you could see, I was confused at first because I didn't notice that there were orcs on the other side of him. And
I saw them.
Like, the second time watching it, I saw.
So at the very end of the second episode, Halbrand and Galadriel are laying. They survived the storm, survived drowning, and they're a shadowy figure, right, arose, and we quickly get to find out who these people are. I think a lot of people speculated that it was people from Numenor.
Yeah.
And indeed it is.
Trailers give you some stuff.
So coming in to Numenor, I immediately knew it was Numenor because I saw the beacon light up, and it instantly reminded me of the beacons in The Lord of the Rings that Aragorn wanted to be lit. And then all of the statue figures as well. I definitely got goosebumps, like imagining myself being in Numenor for the first time. When they got to Numenor and they're walking through the streets and Galadriel's giving Halbrand the history, we see blacksmiths in the background. And as Halbrand walks past it, he pauses and watches them, and instantly I went, are they trying to make us think he's Sauron?
There's so many plot points that I just am not sure at this point.
The other thing that was interesting to me is when we're talking about him potentially being a bad guy, when they're talking to the Elf Queen and Galadriel picks a fight, he kind of like steps up and puts the charm on, and he does that several times through this episode. So he does it again when he's having drinks. You can like the music even like intensifies, and it's like he's gone somewhere else, and then he snaps back into reality and charms them and buys them all drinks and becomes their friend. And then after he steals the brooch from the guy and they corner him in the alley, he tells them, don't do this. And originally you're thinking he's saying don't do this because himself doesn't want to get hurt. But what he's saying is don't do this to yourself, because then he just snaps and then snaps one of their arms, which was really hard to watch, by the way.
That's stuff like that. I'm not good with stuff like that, but it was intense.
Yeah, and then I thought the shooting style was cool too. Like at one point they threw blood onto the screen.
Yeah, and it's like
that.
It's
it was
like blurry
like
on
video game-esque.
Yeah, it was cool.
You know?
If Halbrand ends up being any sort of enemy eventually, I love and hate what's happening to him right now, just with the potential foresight of him being a bad guy eventually, because he's trying to not end up being that way. Like he talks about he wants to have a fresh start, doing blacksmithing and just making a life for himself here. And then if he ends up, turning.
Dr. Sarah Brown told us that we're going to get to see all the rings of power made. And like, I think we're going to like fall in love with some of these characters that end up being bad guys. Like all of the Nazgul, I'd love to like be like, oh, he's one of my favorite characters. Oh, he becomes a Nazgul.
That it makes villains so much better when you are empathetic for them. Still, it makes villains mean so much more.
Some of the theories I've heard is that he could be the Witch King.
Yeah,
I've seen another one where he could be the king of the undead.
Oh,
from the Lord of the Rings.
I hadn't seen that one. Okay.
But that one, he'd have to swear an oath and then break it just like his forefathers did. I would hope he wouldn't repeat the same mistake.
Now, if you've got a franchise and that's what this is, then you've got to have hooks to keep people buying into it. So I would think there will be teasers all along the line saying, tune in next week and you will find out who the mystery man is. What a movie has to do, which is to move, and what a book can do, which is to stay still. My big example of the power of nothing, the power of emptiness, is a moment in The Lord of the Rings where somebody doesn't do something. The moment at the cracks of doom where, after having built up for 3 volumes to the climactic moment, a major character doesn't do something. Frodo says, I won't do it. And that creates a sort of stunned silence, which I think is much, much more effective than all the leaping and jumping and special effects. It is, in its own way, I guess, if you like, a very special effect. It's the effect of silence, of everything just coming to a dead stop. I think I know it's the most powerful moment in the book. I think it's the most powerful moment in 20th century literature because it stops you cold.
We cut to the sea, and there are people on a ship working, and one of them says, Isildur. And I got, again, goosebumps instantly. I did not think we were going to meet Isildur.
Who was whispering to Isildur when he's kind of first introduced?
Yeah. Are you talking about when he was looking at the mountains?
Yeah, he was looking at the mountains. Isildur.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought that was weird. I kind of took it as, because he kind of like looks off and it's beautiful, right? It's Numenor. It's home. It's where he loves. You can tell he loves the sea. He loves his home. I just took it as like that he has a deep calling.
Not really like foreshadowing, just kind of like his.
Yeah, I didn't take it as I took it as his heart, but I did hear it, and it is weird when I hear voices, it's a bad thing.
Yeah, and people usually whisper to me that aren't around me.
Yeah, that's not good.
But yeah, I just try not to listen to him.
The name Isildur was lost on my sister, my wife. They did not know who Isildur was. My children either. And so I had to explain to them that Isildur is the one who cuts the ring off Sauron's hand.
So that moment means nothing. Didn't really mean anything to them, but you're like goosebumps.
Yeah, I like paused the show. I needed to process it for a second. I wanted to go watch the prologue of the Fellowship of the Rings. And what happens is in the movie, Sauron comes out. He's got the ring on, and he's slaying people left and right. And then Elendil steps up, and Sauron slams him against a rock and kills him. That is our captain here. That is the same character. And Isildur grabs the sword, his father's sword, and he cuts the ring off of Sauron's hand. And then Isildur has a chance to destroy the ring. And I literally wrote down that Isildur failed us hard because he kept the ring for himself. And then the ring betrayed him. He was killed. And the ring sat for 2,500 years until it was found by Gollum and his friend.
It's all these moments of building characters that you love. And then just like we do, we let other people down. We know. The sad thing is we know that they're how they let us down eventually.
Right. But
we're still already seeing Isildur, like you said, you just get goosebumps. Like he's a heroic character that we know that lets us down, but
and what's neat too is he's a little bit underachieving. Right? He's underachieving. He tells his dad in a little bit, he doesn't want to go and pass the tests, right? He wants to take some time off. And we know that he and his brother, who we haven't met yet, but we will, and his father, they go to Middle Earth, and they establish Gondor, Isildur, and his brother. And then you put that against Halbrand, which is not a character we know. It's not a name from the books as far as I know. And we don't know who his role is going to be, and we don't know who he is. And I kind of like that. So then I loved it. The map, it shows us traveling from Numenor across the Sundering Seas. It goes right over the words, the Sundering Seas, to Middle Earth. And I had a friend of mine ask me if I knew where Numenor was on the map compared to Valinor, Middle Earth. Where is it located? And so I have a book here called The Atlas of Middle Earth, and in it they go through the first age, second, and third age, and there is a map of the world here, and it is a circular world, a ball world. It doesn't look like it's a flat Earth here. Sorry, flat earthers. It does not appear that way, but it shows that Numenor is actually quite close to Valinor, about somewhere around 800 miles, maybe a little less, from Valinor to Numenor. And Numenor is pretty big. It is south of Middle Earth, and is like, it's 1,200 miles or so to Middle Earth, maybe a little less, maybe a little further at certain points as well. I will say that this map also reminds me of Europe and Asia, and then Africa. Like, I can kind of see it.
Yeah.
Right? It kind of lays out that way. So yeah, that's where Numenor is. It also makes me, like, I'd love to know how far Galadriel swam.
Yeah, if you've ever swam 100 meters, 800 miles?
Right. I mean, she didn't swim all the way to Numenor,
Yeah.
but it had to be, I mean, they probably stay within their kingdom realm, right? They're not just going all the way to Valinor. They didn't pick her up just a couple yards after that. It also makes me wonder, how did Halbrand and them get past Numenor? So did she swim around Numenor somehow? None of that makes sense to me. I'd love to know. It might just be an oversight.
Yeah, that could just be.
But we're talking.
But that's interesting.
Like hundreds of miles.
Because if they're coming from the Southlands,
right?
Numenor is twice as far away from Valinor,
Yep.
if not more, from Middle Earth. Yeah. Are they going around trying to get to Valinor?
I don't know what they were doing. Or was Halbrand secretly looking for Numenor the whole time?
Could be questions that are answered. Could
know.
just be questions.
So we find out that Elendil speaks Elvish, and Galadriel realizes that not everybody hates the elves.
Yeah.
He tells her that there's the Hall of Lore, and it's a day's ride, and she says, "Ride?" And then that scene with them riding the horses,
A little cringy.
it was weird.
It was a little cringy.
I don't. She was so happy to ride a horse.
Yeah.
Has it been 1,000 years since she's ridden a horse or something?
There's a couple great slow-mo scenes in this episode.
This is not
This one doesn't make the cut to be great. Like when Elendil is walking in the hall, is slow-mo. That's cool. When Isildur is introduced, is slow-mo. That's cool. Galadriel on the horse, slow-mo.
Not as cool. It was like they just gotten a new camera and wanted to try the slow-mo out.
Yeah.
They get to the Hall of Lore, and she gives him the drawing of the stamp that was on her brother, and they find out that it's the Southlands.
Oh, yeah.
It's Mordor.
Matches the map. Yeah.
Yep. So she knows that they're compiling, all of the evil to that area now. So Halbrand ends up in jail for beating up all of those people.
Pretty impressive.
Yes.
Pretty
If it was me, I would be in the hospital.
Yeah.
He's in jail, no mark on him.
That first punch, I'd be down.
Yeah. Yeah. And Galadriel reveals to him that she knows he's the true king of the Southlands, and that his
crest.
Yes,
Yeah.
she knows what his crest means, and then he admits to it and says that basically it's a line like Aragorn said, the same blood that runs through their veins runs through mine, saying he might fail because they have failed. He kind of says the same line. So he's running away from that as well. So I see an Aragorn character inside of him as well. I could see evil in him too.
He gives both.
He gives both.
That's where he's different from Aragorn.
It's halfway through the episode before we get to the Harfoots. I didn't realize it was the Harfoots at first because they're wearing this garb.
Yeah.
It's their festival, right, that they've been talking about. So it comes in sinister and then quickly lightens up.
Yeah, almost a mask that reminds you of what the orcs are wearing at the beginning.
Yes, and they're chanting, "Nobody goes off trail, and nobody walks alone. Nobody goes off trail, and nobody walks alone." That's all they got. They should have had more. It's the one motto.
And nobody gets left behind. Maybe we should say that.
Ooh. I do think that it's interesting, the whole idea that if you're hurt, you get left behind. Not, we'll put you on a cart and we'll pull you, because they all have carts. And so it's not, we'll put you on a cart, we'll pull you. It's you get left behind. And we also see this point where they remember those who have been left behind. And they say, we'll wait for you.
No?
But they won't. It's just how they make themselves feel better.
Yeah.
It's a very me mentality.
Yeah. For a community that is based around community, or what seems like is it based around community, there's a gap. There's definitely a gap there.
I also, in that scene where they name Poppy's entire family, I cried. Twice.
If that doesn't move you, like you're made of stone.
Poppy is very strong.
Yeah, and she's trying to be.
They haven't put any of her pain into her character yet until that moment. And even still, she still wants to help them. She wants to help Nori not get left behind. But now we realize it's because her family died and got left behind.
Yeah.
The other part where they're talking about people getting left behind was the one who they called an idiot.
Idiot. Bees. We all loved him. He sure was an idiot.
One of the big questions from episode 2 to 3 was everybody speculating on who the stranger was. Is the stranger Sauron? I think it's pretty clear in episode 3, when we get to the Harfoots, it's pretty clear he's not evil.
Honestly, I was sold that he was Sauron completely. And I wasn't forthright with that in the last episode when we were talking, but I really was. I was sold that he was Sauron, and then this episode did pretty well just take me away from that theory.
He was in this episode. He's confused and gentle.
Mm-hmm.
And I love when Poppy was even kind of chastising Nori about it, and she was like, he sometimes murders fireflies, and she says that was an accident. So while the Harfoots are having their little ceremony, the stranger goes through Eleanor's bag, Nori's bag, and finds what she pulled out, and then he goes to the fire to read it. It's very reminiscent to me of Gandalf when he is trying to study and read and look through things in the movies, in the Lord of the Rings. The way he moves his hair is very reminiscent of how I think they want us to think a wizard would be like. Mm-hmm. And so I do now think he is a wizard. I just don't know who. I tend to think not Gandalf, because who would want to replace Ian McKellen?
Yeah.
Right? So I'm thinking about it from the standpoint of putting it all together, like the show writers. Mm-hmm. I don't think they'd want it to be Gandalf. I think they would want us to feel the same emotions Gandalf makes us feel.
Yeah.
So I've heard a theory, and I want to go with that theory for now, that maybe there were 2 meteors and we only saw one, or we saw both, but just didn't realize it was 2 different meteors. And that the blue wizards, both blue wizards, are in Middle-earth now. And so maybe he's one of the blue wizards. So he ends up causing a ruckus, and he turns around and says, Nori. And she knows she's in so much trouble.
Nori has been discovered as the Stranger's Keeper, and then she says she protects Poppy from being discovered as well. And then Nori delivers a great line on her toes. She says, without friends, what are we surviving for? For people that give off the appearance of sticking with each other to the end, a part of your community guidelines is that you're pretty quick to kick somebody out. Seems to be something missing there.
For me, it is that we have to see a progression of them growing as people. Like they eventually settle in the Shire and live in hobbit holes and mind their own business. For me, it's a progression. So they start here, they end here. And we need to see that arc in them. I also love when they tell him to be at the back. Nori's dad's like, at the back? And they're walking away, and you can hear it. He's like, do you mean the back or do you mean the middle back? Like, what's the middle back?
That's a very, like, Hobbit-esque banter. Yeah.
So I resonate with the hobbits. I feel like a hobbit. Is there a certain group of people that you resonate with the most?
Oh, the hobbits, absolutely. They're the ones that bring you into the story. They're the regular guys. Somebody crafted a whole sort of idea of different kinds of fantasy, and there's portal fantasy and immersion fantasy and the Lord of the Rings. I think she said, but please don't quote me, was an immersion fantasy because you just go right into that world. There's no transition like the wardrobe, like with C.S. Lewis, in which you go from one to another. You're just in it. And that's true, but it's only partially true because the hobbits go into the world of Middle Earth and they discover it, because the Shire is a very small little enclave and they don't even have maps beyond the borders. So they are as ignorant as the reader is in many respects. And in that respect, it is a portal fantasy because the hobbits cross under the hedge. They go into the underworld. And then they come up again and they're in the old forest. And it's all new to them, and they're talking trees and elves and
trolls
and all of that. So I think the hobbits are our guides into Tolkien's world, and it's because we can identify with them. They like to eat. I love to eat. So I really identify with that. They like simple things. They like bread and cheese and beer and mushrooms. They take baths, which means they get dirty. Nobody else in The Lord of the Rings ever, as I can recall, takes a bath. But it's such a down-home thing to do. So yeah, it's the hobbits for me. And it was for Tolkien. He said they're the ones who brought it down to earth.
So the Harfoots are migrating, and Nori's dad cannot do it. The stranger appears and starts moving their cart for them, and they form a pact together that they're going to let him do that. That's how they're going to keep up. Allow the stranger to push the cart for them from the back. So now it's a good thing they were in the back.
Yeah.
Because they weren't going to, it's clear they weren't going to make it.
Yep.
They were going to get passed up and left behind. But the stranger followed them. And I love how Nori's sibling says, can we keep him?
Yeah.
So Adar looks like a humanoid to me, and then we see his hand, and it looks like Sauron's
It does,
hand.
yeah.
And at the beginning, remember, they said, why does he have an elf name? right? And all we get to see is this blurry man. And I can see Elfir a little bit.
Yeah, you can kind of see it.
I wonder, we're obviously going to get more next week on who he is. I mean, is that Sauron? Are we just going to be given it? This is Sauron. So for me, the movies got me into Tolkien, right? Can you see like that? Maybe this will do that for a new generation of Tolkien lovers.
It probably will. I don't know. There's a lot of talk about the fact that the movies, the Jackson movies, are really what got people interested in Tolkien. But people have always been interested ever since the books came out. There's never been any lack of readers or lack of reasons to publish a new edition. So it's not like the book was dying on the shelves and the movies revived it. I think people who like this sort of thing will find their way to Tolkien with or without the movies.
I also appreciate that you're willing to come on here and give your opinion that's going to be different than most people that are going to be listening to our podcast. And I trust that our listeners will appreciate your opinion, because I think there's a place for disagreement. I think there's a place for gatekeeping Tolkien, basically, right? Trying to keep it pure to what he wrote.
I'm just talking about myself. I can't say anything for anybody else. People are free to watch the Amazon series and free to enjoy it. My gosh, I'm not crusading. I'm just telling you what my take is.
You don't have a vendetta against Amazon or Bezos.
No, I do not. I'm not going to watch it, but I wouldn't get much pleasure out of it.
I want to say a special thank you to Dr. Verlyn Flieger for joining us today. We are truly honored to have heard from you on all things Tolkien.
Wherever you're watching, please remember to like and subscribe and share it with others. If you have any comments or questions you would like us to answer, please email us at acrossthesundering.seas@gmail.com.
Thanks again for joining us on Across the Sundering Seas. Do you know the comings and the goings of entering and exiting Valinor by chance?
It depends on what time it is. It depends on whether the earth has been separated from Valinor and bent into a circle. If that is the case, then the straight road to Valinor would sort of come off the high point of a globe and continue into the west, and very few people can make that journey. At the end of The Lord of the Rings, when they're all at the Grey Havens and they're saying goodbye to Frodo, and they watch him sail down the firth, the ship does not disappear over the horizon as it would in our world. It gets smaller and smaller and smaller, but it doesn't go over the edge because it's on the straight road. But that is a road accessible to very few. So I don't know how somebody would leave Valinor to come to Middle Earth, except in the Second Age.
And how does that happen in the Second Age?
That's before the earth is bent.
Where does most of the information we know about the Second Age come from?
The appendices to The Lord of the Rings. Tolkien did write a good deal about that. And there is some from Christopher Tolkien's History of Middle-earth, which is 12 volumes. So you can gather together a fair amount of information about things that went on in the Second Age. Tolkien left the Second Age to the appendix. He did not fill it in. And for me, it's the blanks that make it interesting. Now, for the Amazon people, that's exactly what they want to fill in. And I think that sometimes to leave things unfilled in gives more room for imagination than to have, everything all colored in nicely, like in a children's coloring book.
Is there anything like in the Tolkien world that you could think of right now that would be fun to talk about, or that you could say?
Oh, everything, tons of things. The languages, the peoples, the power of his invention, the way that he changed the book while he was writing it, so that, for example, Treebeard started out as a giant and a bad guy. And that Tolkien worked with the stuff and let it grow and let it become what it was, and was willing to change and watch his own world sort of grow under his hands. This is a terrible metaphor, and I'm not going to push it very far, but the plant was growing. He was just going to feed and water it.
I had a question that Gabriel had actually wanted me to ask you. I'd love to hear her talk about Owen Barfield's influence on Tolkien, as she discusses it in your book, Splintered Light. But then he questions, it was such a long time ago. I wonder if she could still speak to that.
Well, yes, a little bit. I don't know that I can say much more than I said in the book, but what I said there was that Tolkien knew Owen Barfield, who is a sort of philosopher of language. I mean, his profession was as a lawyer. He was a solicitor, but his great love and the books that he wrote were about language and the history of language and the connection between language and the world and our understanding of the world, for which he wrote, language is kind of the interface. And Tolkien said, and was quoted as saying at one point to C.S. Lewis, after you've read Barfield on language, there are all sorts of things you can't say again. And I got kind of interested in what those things might be. And that led me to Tolkien's own languages and to his understanding of the importance of words and of the great power of words. And I think that's pretty much what I wrote about in Splintered Light. Tolkien said at one point, after The Lord of the Rings first came out, that he had actually started with invented languages, his elven languages. Well, nobody believed him that you could create such a vast and intricate world by inventing a language like Pig Latin. That didn't seem to compute. But he was absolutely right. He had started with languages, and then he realized that you can't invent a language without inventing the people who speak it. And you can't know the people who speak it unless you know what kind of world they live in and use that language to discover and to describe. And so the whole thing becomes a kind of round robin in which language leads to people, leads to world, leads to language, leads to people, and you just go on and on. And that's what happened to Tolkien. He invented, well, I think actually 12 separate languages, but the two main ones, his Elvish languages, were Quenya and Sindarin. Quenya he called Elven Latin. He meant it to be a kind of antique language of lore. And then Sindarin was the language of everyday. But the world grew out of those words.
I saw something on the internet that said Tolkien spent years and years and years inventing a language and then wrote a story, and C.S. Lewis created a story that started with a lamppost and said, forget about how it got here, we'll figure it out later.
That's pretty much true, and it's pretty much typical of both men.